My name is Alice, and for 34 years, my professional life has been a punchline at my own family's dinner table. The punchline was always the same, that I, a landscape architect with a master's degree in ecological design, was just a glorified gardener. The setup to the joke was always my brother, Lucas, the visionary, the titan, the property developer who built monuments of glass and steel. But tonight, at the lavish party for my parents' 40th anniversary, held on the 50th floor of his crowning achievement, a building that would have remained a blueprint without me, I was going to deliver the punchline. It was tucked inside a heavy cream-colored envelope, and it was going to be the sweetest, most bitter, and most liberating revenge I could possibly imagine. Before I reveal how a final invoice and a single-page letter brought a self-proclaimed visionary to his knees in front of everyone who mattered, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever felt underestimated by the very people who should have been your biggest cheerleaders, go ahead and hit that like button, so I know I'm not alone. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe, because this channel is a community for people who know the struggle and celebrate the moment when the tables finally, spectacularly turn. The roots of my family's blindness were planted deep in the soil of our childhood. I see it now in faded photographs and brittle home movies. There's a 5-year-old Lucas, standing proudly beside a teetering tower of multicolored Lego blocks, a creation of pure, chaotic ambition. He'd used every piece in the box, building for height and nothing else. My parents are beaming, their faces glowing with a pride so intense it practically radiates from the grainy footage. My father's voice, a low rumble behind the camera, proclaims, "A regular architect, this one. A builder of cities." Then the camera pans, almost as an afterthought to me. I'm 7, kneeling on a plastic sheet my mother insisted I use, hunched over a large glass jar. Inside is not just dirt and a few wilting dandelions. It's a self-contained world. I had spent weeks at the library, poring over books on ecosystems, learning about drainage layers, activated charcoal, and the specific mosses that thrived in humid, low-light conditions. I'd created a miniature rainforest, complete with tiny, jewel-like ferns and a patch of moss that looked like a tiny emerald carpet. When my father's gaze finally falls upon it, his enthusiasm deflates like a punctured balloon. "Oh, that's nice, Alice," he says, the camera wavering. "Just make sure you don't get any of that dirt on the living room rug." The camera quickly swings back to Lucas's tower, as if embarrassed to have lingered on something so small, so earthy. That single moment became the blueprint for the next 3 decades. Every achievement of mine was filtered through their lens of practicality and perceived status, while Lucas's every move was hailed as a stroke of genius. When it came time for college applications, the chasm between us widened into a canyon. Lucas declared he would major in business with a focus on real estate. My parents threw a celebratory dinner at the most expensive steakhouse in town. The toasts were endless, filled with talk of dynasties and legacies. My father clapped Lucas on the back, his eyes misty. "My son," he'd announced to the entire restaurant, "is going to build the future." A few weeks later, I sat them down in that same living room where my terrarium had been judged, and I told them I had been accepted into one of the top landscape architecture programs in the country. I tried to explain my passion, my voice trembling with excitement as I talked about sustainable urban design, bioremediation, and the psychological benefits of restorative green spaces. I showed them my portfolio, filled with designs for public parks that integrated native plants and innovative water reclamation systems. My mother just smiled a tight, strained smile. "Well, that's creative, dear," she'd said, exchanging a worried glance with my father. My dad cleared his throat, leaning forward with the air of a man about to deliver a difficult but necessary truth. "Alice, we're proud of you for getting in, of course we are. But landscape architecture? It sounds a bit like, well, it sounds like a hobby. Are you sure you can make a real career out of that? It's a lot of mud and dirt. Your brother is setting himself up for life. We just want you to be secure." The implication was clear. Lucas was building a secure, respectable, and lucrative future. I was choosing to play in the mud. They saw no vision in my work, only vegetation. They couldn't comprehend the science, the artistry, the engineering that went into creating a living, breathing space. To them, a building was an accomplishment, a garden was a decoration. This fundamental misunderstanding wasn't malicious. Not in the way a villain in a story is malicious. It was worse. It was a complete and utter lack of imagination on their part, an inability to see value in anything that couldn't be quantified in square footage and profit margins. The only person who ever seemed to see me clearly was my grandmother, my dad's mother, Eleanor. She was a woman whose hands were permanently stained with the earth, her fingernails repositories of rich, dark soil. Her garden wasn't a collection of pristine, manicured flower beds. It was a chaotic symphony of life. It was where she had taught me the names of plants, not just their common names, but their Latin ones, whispering them to me like secrets. Digitalis purpurea, she'd say, pointing to a towering foxglove. Beautiful, but deceptive. You have to know what's on the inside. She was the one who bought me my first set of professional drafting pencils and a sketchbook with thick, creamy paper. While my parents were buying Lucas books on negotiation and power suits, Grandma Eleanor gave me a dog-eared copy of a biography on Frederick Law Olmsted, the designer of Central Park. "Don't you ever let them make you feel small, Alice," she told me one afternoon, as we sat on her porch shelling peas. Her voice was firm, her gaze direct. "The world is choking on steel and concrete. It needs people who build things that grow, not just things that are tall. What you do, it's about healing. Don't you forget that." When she passed away during my sophomore year of college, it felt like my only shield had been lowered. The world suddenly felt colder, and my family's opinions, which her presence had helped me deflect, began to hit their mark. I soldiered on, graduated with honors, and tried to start my own firm, Verdant Futures, LLC. It was a struggle. The niche I'd chosen, restorative, ecologically sound design, wasn't mainstream yet. Potential clients wanted manicured lawns and tidy flower beds, not native grasses and pollinator-friendly habitats. I took on small, uninspiring jobs, designing patios for suburbanites, choosing shrubs for small office parks. My parents' "we told you so" was never spoken aloud, but it hung in the air during every family dinner. "Did you hear?" my mother would say, her voice brimming with pride. "Lucas just closed on a major parcel of land downtown. He's going to build the tallest residential tower in the city." Then she'd turn to me, her expression softening into one of pity. "How are things with your garden business, dear?" "Mrs. Henderson from down the street said the petunias you planted for her are doing very well." The condescension was so casual, so ingrained, they didn't even recognize it. I was their 30-something daughter, and they were praising me for planting petunias. The anger was a slow, simmering fire in my gut, but it was banked by a desperate, pathetic yearning for their approval. I kept thinking that one day, I would complete a project so significant, so undeniable, that they would finally have to see my work for what it was. Then one Tuesday afternoon, the phone rang. It was Lucas. He never called me unless he wanted something. His voice was slick with a forced bonhomie that always set my teeth on edge. "Allie, how's my favorite sister?" I was his only sister. "I'm fine, Lucas. What's up?" I said, keeping my tone flat. He launched into a rambling monologue about his latest project, the one my mother had been crowing about. He called it the Zenith. It was to be his masterpiece, a 50-story luxury condominium that would redefine the city's skyline. But he'd hit a snag. A big one. "So, the city planning board is being a real pain," he said, the frustration finally seeping through his polished veneer. "They're holding up the final permits. Some new environmental mandate. They're saying because of the building's footprint, I have to incorporate a significant and revolutionary green initiative. They want something that sets a new standard for urban sustainability. My usual guys, they just keep pitching me AstroTurf and a few sad-looking planter boxes. They don't get it." He paused, and I could hear the gears turning in his head. "And then I thought of you," he said, as if bestowing upon me a great honor. "I have this massive rooftop space, a blank canvas. I need something visionary. Something that will get those granola-crunching bureaucrats off my back. I thought this might be a good little project for you. Good for your portfolio." The offer was a backhanded compliment wrapped in an insult. He didn't come to me as a peer, as a professional with a unique skill set he desperately needed. He came to me as a last resort, framing it as an act of charity. He needed a revolutionary design, and he was offering it to me like a scrap from his table. Part of me, the part that had been nourished by Grandma Eleanor's belief, wanted to tell him to get lost. But another part, the small, wounded child still seeking her father's approval, saw this as the chance I had been waiting for. This wasn't a suburban patio. This was the rooftop of the tallest residential building in the city. A project of this scale, this visibility, they wouldn't be able to ignore it. They wouldn't be able to dismiss it as playing in the dirt. This was my chance to finally prove them all wrong. Send me the architectural plans and the city's mandate, I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me. I'll see what I can do. I sent him a proposal a week later. It was ambitious. A fully self-sustaining rooftop sanctuary. A closed-loop gray water irrigation system, fed by the building's own wastewater. A series of interconnected microhabitats designed to attract migratory birds and native pollinators. Lightweight soil composites developed for high-altitude planting, wind-resistant flora, and a central geodesic dome that would serve as a year-round greenhouse. It was the culmination of everything I had studied, everything I believed in. Lucas called me back, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. Wow, Allie. This is exactly what I need. For a fleeting moment, my heart soared. But then came the hook. My legal team will draw up the contracts, he said, his voice shifting back to its usual brisk, business-like tone. We'll hire your company as a consultant. For brand cohesion, we need to keep the messaging tight. One project, one vision, one name, mine. So your firm's involvement will have to be completely confidential. Anonymity clause, non-disclosure, the whole 9 yards. It's just cleaner that way. No messy family stuff. It was a slap in the face. He wanted my vision, my soul, my revolutionary design, but he wanted to put his name on it. He wanted to erase me from my own creation. I should have walked away. My best friend, Chloe, a sharp-as-a-tack contract lawyer, practically begged me to. We met for coffee, and I showed her the draft agreement Lucas's lawyers had sent over. She read it in silence, her brow furrowing deeper with every page she turned. Alice, this is a predator's contract, she said, sliding it back across the table. This isn't a partnership. This is a work-for-hire agreement designed to strip you of all intellectual property rights. He's not hiring you. He's buying your ideas so he can claim them as his own. The anonymity clause is ironclad. If you sign this, legally, you will have had nothing to do with this project. He will own your work, your design, everything. Don't do this to yourself. Her words were sensible, logical, and right. But they were competing with a lifetime of emotional hunger. I saw the rooftop sanctuary in my mind's eye, a vibrant, living testament to my abilities. I imagined the articles that would be written, the awards it would win. Even if my name wasn't on it, I would know. And I clung to the foolish, naive hope that once it was built, once my family saw its breathtaking beauty, Lucas would have a change of heart. He would have to acknowledge me. In a moment of weakness that I would come to regret and then, ultimately, cherish, I picked up a pen. It's the only way, Chloe, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It's the only way they'll ever see what I can do. I signed the contract, effectively selling my masterpiece and my identity for a chance at the validation I should never have needed in the first place. The work began, and for the next 18 months, I poured every ounce of my being into the Zenith Rooftop Sanctuary. It was the most challenging and exhilarating project of my life. This was not landscape gardening. This was high-altitude engineering. I spent weeks consulting with structural engineers, developing a system of lightweight modular planters that wouldn't compromise the building's integrity. I worked with meteorologists to model the wind patterns 50 stories up, selecting species of grasses and hardy perennials that could withstand the constant buffeting. I designed a sophisticated irrigation system that captured and filtered gray water from the building's showers and sinks, making the sanctuary almost entirely self-sufficient. This was a living machine, a lung for the concrete beast Lucas was building. My days were a blur of drafting tables, soil analysis reports, and calls with suppliers of rare plants. My small office was littered with schematics, botanical textbooks, and prototypes for custom-built nesting boxes. I was creating a haven, a pocket of wilderness suspended in the sky. Meanwhile, my interactions with Lucas were a study in corporate theft. We had weekly progress calls, sterile and impersonal. I would detail a breakthrough, a new soil mix that was 30% lighter but had better water retention, or a way to use symbiotic planting to naturally deter pests. And he would grunt an acknowledgement, take copious notes, and end the call. The very next day, I would see his name in the news. An interview in Modern Architecture magazine featured him talking about his revolutionary approach to green roofing. "You can't just throw some dirt on a roof," he was quoted as saying, his smug face staring out from the glossy page. "I developed a proprietary soil composite that is both lightweight and highly absorbent. It's about a holistic approach." He was parroting my words, my research, my breakthroughs, and passing them off as his own epiphanies. I would read these articles and feel a cold, helpless fury wash over me. I was contractually bound to silence. I was a ghost, haunting my own creation. The project became my obsession, but it also became my prison. The more beautiful and innovative the sanctuary became, the more Lucas's lies grew. The breaking point, the moment the simmering fire in my gut began to roar, came during a mandatory Sunday dinner at my parents' house. It was about a month before the building's completion. The mood was celebratory. Lucas had just secured the final certificate of occupancy from the city, thanks in large part to the glowing report from the planning board about the rooftop sanctuary. My father was holding court, a glass of expensive red wine in his hand. "I tell you, this boy is a genius," he said, beaming at Lucas. "A true visionary. He sees things no one else does." My mother nodded enthusiastically. "He's completely revitalizing that part of the city. Everyone says so." Lucas, to his credit, played the part of the humble visionary to perfection. He waved a dismissive hand, a study in false modesty. "It wasn't easy, Dad," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The city threw every environmental hurdle at me. They wanted to shut me down. But I had this idea, this vision of turning the biggest challenge into the project's greatest asset. I imagined an ecosystem on the roof, a sanctuary. It just came to me one night. A way to give back to the city, to create something truly sustainable." As he said the word sanctuary, he glanced at me across the table. And he winked. It wasn't a friendly wink. It was a wink of complicity, a wink that said, asterisk, "You're my little secret. Dance, puppet, dance." Asterisk, it was a wink that acknowledged the lie and reveled in it. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The years of casual dismissals, the constant praise for my brother, the gut-wrenching theft of my work, it all coalesced into a single, blinding point of rage. I felt the blood drain from my face. I mumbled something about needing to use the restroom and fled from the table, my hands trembling. I locked the bathroom door and leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide with a pain so deep it felt ancient. The woman staring back at me was a fool. A fool who had traded her integrity for a phantom, for a crumb of approval from people who were incapable of giving it. The hurt was so profound it was physical, an ache deep in my chest. But as I stood there, gasping for air, that profound hurt began to transform. It slowly, almost chemically, began to curdle into something else. Something cold, hard, and clear. It was resolve. The final insult, the one that solidified my newfound resolve into a concrete plan, arrived in the mail 2 weeks later. It was a thick, oversized envelope of shimmering cardstock. The invitation to my parents' 40th anniversary party. The event was, of course, being hosted by Lucas at the Zenith, his grand unveiling. The invitation itself was a monument to his ego, embossed with a golden rendering of the building's silhouette. But tucked inside was a smaller, separate card, a simple seating assignment with my name elegantly calligraphed on it, Alice Vance. Table 14. I didn't need a floor plan to know what that meant. In my family, the tables were numbered by proximity to the head table, a clear and brutal hierarchy. Table 1 was the immediate family, Mom, Dad, Lucas, and his perfect wife. Tables 2 and 3 were for important business partners and close family friends. Table 14 was the hinterlands. It was the pity table, the one reserved for distant, twice-removed cousins you see only at weddings and funerals, the children of my parents' colleagues, people I barely knew. It was a deliberate, public, and unequivocal statement of my status. I wasn't just being sidelined, I was being formally exiled. I was an afterthought at my own family's celebration. I stood in my hallway staring at that little card, and I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel angry. I felt nothing. A profound and chilling emptiness where all the hope and yearning used to be. The last thread had snapped. He hadn't just stolen my work. He was now using the very venue my work had made possible to publicly humiliate me. He was flaunting his success, a success built on my ghost-written genius, while seating me with the extras. That was it. My need for their approval died right there in that hallway. It wasn't a violent death. It was a quiet, final exhalation. And in its place, a plan began to form. A plan that was cold, professional, and utterly ruthless. That evening, I called Chloe. My voice was steady, devoid of the frantic energy it had held when I'd shown her the contract months ago. "Chloe, it's Alice," I said. "You were right about everything. I need your help. It's time to prepare the final invoice." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and then I heard the smile in her voice. "I've been waiting for this call," she said. "Let's burn it all down." We spent the entire next evening in her office, surrounded by takeout containers and legal documents. We went through the predatory contract with a fine-toothed comb, but this time we weren't looking at it as victims. We were looking for weapons. And we found them. Lucas, in his arrogance, had likely never read the fine print his own lawyers had drafted. Tucked away in a subclause of the payment schedule was a provision for a project completion and success bonus, a 15% surcharge on the total project fee, payable upon the issuance of the certificate of occupancy, if the project was lauded in major media for its innovative features. His own ego had set the trap. We found clauses for late payment penalties, for additional consulting fees Lucas had never bothered to formally reject. By the time we were done, the final bill was staggering. It was a sum that would not go unnoticed. Then we drafted the letter. It was short, brutally professional, and colder than a crypt. It stated that Verdant Futures LLC was formally invoking the termination clause, effective immediately, and would be withdrawing from any and all proposed future collaborations, citing a fundamental breach of professional trust. There was no emotion, no accusation. Just a clean, legal severing of ties. Holding the finished invoice and the letter in my hands felt like holding a key. I wasn't just ending a business relationship. I was ending my lifelong role as the family's forgotten daughter. I was about to write myself back into my own story. The night of the party, I arrived at the Zenith alone. The lobby was an exercise in sterile opulence. Acres of polished black marble, soaring columns of brushed steel, and cold, recessed lighting that made everyone look like a ghost. On a towering wall behind the concierge desk, a massive bronze plaque gleamed under a spotlight. The Zenith. It read in stark, bold letters. A Singular Vision by Lucas Vance. I stood there for a long moment, tracing the letters of his name with my eyes. There was no mention of Verdant Futures, no credit for the sanctuary, no acknowledgement of the one feature that had saved his singular vision from being a singular failure. I felt a flicker of the old anger, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, thrilling sense of anticipation. He had built this monument to his ego, but he'd forgotten to pay the architect of its soul. I found my way to the 50th floor. The party was in full swing in the main ballroom, but the real event was taking place on the Starlight Terrace, an expansive outdoor space that wrapped around the building. And there, separated by a floor-to-ceiling wall of retractable glass, was my sanctuary. It was even more beautiful than I had imagined. Soft, golden light emanated from fixtures hidden within the foliage, creating an ethereal glow. The gentle sound of trickling water from the reclamation stream was a soft counterpoint to the drone of the party. Even from a distance, I could see the sway of the tall grasses, the deep, lush green of the moss beds. It was a living, breathing work of art. My work of art. I found table 14 in a forgotten corner near the service entrance. The distant cousins seated there gave me polite, confused smiles. I sat down, my clutch containing the heavy vellum envelope resting in my lap. I nursed a single glass of champagne, watching my family at the head table. My mother, resplendent in a sequin dress, was laughing, her eyes fixed on Lucas with adoration. My father looked more proud than I had ever seen him, like a king surveying his heir's domain.